This beggar girl prevents a millionaire from drinking poison, but minutes later, something shocking happens. Comment what you think will happen and subscribe to my channel to support my work. The scream sliced through the muggy afternoon air like a knife, echoing through the brick streets of Charleston, South Carolina at precisely 3:00 p.m. Derek Vanderbilt, 52, nearly spilled his coffee as he stepped away from the window of his luxury condo. It was always at the same time, always with the same desperate intensity. For 3 weeks straight, that sound had been coming from the rundown house across the street. A faded yellow two-story building with peeling blue window shutters that clashed with the elegance of the modern building where he lived. As the owner of Vanderbilt Construction, one of the largest companies in the region, Derek had amassed a considerable fortune over the years, investing not only in real estate, but also diversifying his assets in the stock market. "Must be a kid throwing a tantrum," he muttered to himself, adjusting his tie before returning to work. Derek was a meticulous man by nature, controlling in his business dealings and extremely reserved in his personal life. These three characteristics had made him a successful businessman, but they had also isolated him emotionally since he lost his wife, Mary Ann, 5 years earlier. On a rainy night he preferred not to remember. Across the street, inside the dilapidated house, Lily huddled in the corner of the kitchen. Her 4 years of age were insufficient to understand why her Aunt Carol hated her so much. The 38-year-old woman firmly held a metal spoon that she had heated on the gas stove, her eyes bloodshot from the bourbon she'd been drinking, fixed on the girl trembling before her. "You're a curse on this house," Carol hissed, her voice slurred from the liquor she'd been sipping since noon at O'Malley's bar. "Because of you, my sister's gone. Because of you, I lost everything." The spoon came down hard on Lily's small arm, leaving a red mark that would join the other scars that dotted her thin arms. Lily bit her lip to keep from screaming louder. She had learned that screams only enraged her aunt more, who had worked at City Hall until she was fired for constant absences caused by her addiction. The girl closed her eyes and tried to remember her mother, Joan's gentle voice singing that lullaby before bed. It was all that remained of her now, fragments of memories and a melody that insisted on echoing in her mind during the most painful moments. "Stop sniveling," Carol growled, putting the spoon back in the drawer as if it were the most natural thing in the world. "Go to your room, and I don't want to see you until tomorrow. And if you mess up the walls again with that dirty charcoal, you'll see what real punishment is." Lily ran to the small room at the back of the house, a stuffy space with an old bed and a crucifix on the wall. There, she curled up in the thin sheet and began to hum her mother's song softly, the only thing that still comforted her. She didn't know that, across the street, someone had finally paid attention to that melody. Derek stopped reviewing the contracts when he heard the faint but distinct sound. He knew that song. Mary Ann used to sing it when she was cooking, a folk song about free birds. But where was it coming from? He approached the window again, his eyes scanning the facade of the old house. One of the back windows was ajar, and from there came that child's voice, shaky but persistent. For the first time in 3 weeks, Derek felt something other than simple annoyance. His primary motivation had always been to maintain absolute control over his orderly life, avoiding emotional complications that could destabilize the financial empire he had built so carefully. His investments in real estate funds and fixed-income securities guaranteed a stable cash flow, allowing him to live comfortably without getting involved in other people's problems. But there was something in that voice that touched a sensitive chord in his chest, something that reminded him of responsibilities long buried under layers of work and isolation. The internal conflict that had plagued him since Mary Ann's loss was his inability to connect emotionally with other people, preferring to take refuge in the cold security of numbers and contracts. Next door to the old house, Martha Stevenson, a retired schoolteacher of 61, was watering her begonias when she heard the girls singing. Unlike Derek, she could no longer ignore the signs. During her 40 years teaching elementary school, she had developed a sixth sense for children in distress. Her primary motivation was to protect the vulnerable, especially children, using all her pedagogical experience to identify at-risk situations. The Southern culture of caring for neighbors was ingrained in her DNA, but it had also taught her to be cautious before making serious accusations. "That's strange," she thought, observing the windows of the Carter's house, a family she had known for decades. Carol had always been troubled, but since she took custody of her orphaned niece, something had changed in the air of that house. The girl never played in the yard, never ran in the streets like the other children in the historic town. Martha dried her hands on her apron and made a decision. The next morning, she would pay a courtesy visit to her neighbor. It had been a long time since she had spoken properly with Carol, and perhaps it was time to get to know little Lily better. The sun began to set over the mountains that surrounded Charleston when Lily finally fell asleep, exhausted by pain and fear. Across the street, Derek closed the curtains, but he couldn't concentrate. Something had changed that afternoon, and he felt that maybe it was time to pay attention to what was happening beyond his own windows. The next morning brought with it the aroma of fresh bread from the local bakeries and the typical bustle of Charleston awakening for another day. Martha put on her best floral dress and combed her grey hair with extra care. There was something in that child's voice that wouldn't leave her alone, an echo of hopelessness that she recognized from her years as an educator. At 9 o'clock sharp, she knocked on the door of the old house. The sound echoed through the silent interior until shuffling footsteps approached. Carol opened the door with a puffy face and bloodshot eyes, clearly suffering the effects of the previous night's drinking. "Good morning, Carol," Martha said, with her gentlest smile. "I came to pay a courtesy visit. It's been so long since we've talked properly." Carol hesitated, running her hand through her disheveled hair. "Oh, Mrs. Stevenson, It's not a good time. The house is a mess." "Nonsense, dear. We've been neighbors for so long." Martha took a step forward, forcing Carol to back up. "And I'd really like to meet your niece. I hear she's a lovely girl." Carol's face hardened for an instant before forcing a weak smile. "Lily is sick. High fever. Better not get close." At that moment, a soft noise came from the kitchen, the sound of something being dragged on the floor. Martha pricked up her ears, immediately recognizing the sound of a child trying to move silently. Across the street, Derek watched the scene from his window while having breakfast. He had woken up earlier than usual, disturbed by confused dreams where a child's voice mingled with fragmented memories. His net worth, carefully built over decades, provided him with every possible material comfort, but it couldn't buy the peace of mind he sought. When he saw Martha at the door of the old house, a strange curiosity washed over him. The tension in the teacher's body was visible even from a distance, and something in Carol's defensive posture confirmed his growing suspicions that not everything was right in that house. Inside the old house, Carol slammed the door shut and went to the kitchen, where she found Lily huddled behind the table, trying to hide. The girl had tried to reach a glass of water from the sink, but her height didn't allow it, and she had knocked over a chair in the process. "Didn't I tell you to stay in your room?" Carol snarled, her irritation intensified by the hangover and the unexpected visit. "I was thirsty, Aunt Carol," Lily murmured, her big eyes fixed on the floor. "Thirsty?" Carol laughed bitterly. "You want water? Then go get it in the backyard. And since you like to make so much noise, you can stay out there until I decide you can come in." Lily went out to the small backyard, a space surrounded by high walls and dominated by a single magnolia tree. There, she sat on the ground and began to draw with a piece of charcoal she had found near the gas stove. It was always birds, small, big, some flying, others perched on imaginary branches. The hours passed slowly. Carol had locked the back door, leaving Lily in the backyard under the strong midday Charleston sun. The girl began to feel dizzy, but she knew that knocking on the door would only result in more punishment. So she began to sing her mother's song softly, the melody being her only source of comfort. It was this melody that reached Derek's ears again. This time, he couldn't ignore it. There was something too familiar about that voice, that specific song. He picked up his cell phone and almost without thinking began to record. He didn't know exactly why, but an instinct told him that he might need that evidence. As he recorded, fragments of memories began to fit together in his mind like pieces of a macabre puzzle. A secretary who hummed that same song while organizing files in his office. A kind woman who always spoke fondly about her little daughter. A girl named Lily, Derek murmured, his cell phone trembling in his hands. Joan's daughter's name was Lily. The realization hit him like a punch to the stomach. The child who was suffering in the house across the street was the daughter of his former employee, the kind woman who had worked for him for 3 years before simply disappearing. Joan Carter had been his personal assistant, a competent professional who organized his schedule and took care of the company's documentation with exemplary dedication. How hadn't he made this connection before? Derek put his cell phone away and began to walk back and forth in his apartment. He vaguely remembered Joan mentioning family problems, a sister she didn't get along with, financial difficulties she was trying to solve with overtime. But he was so absorbed in his own problems at the time, expanding his investments in cryptocurrency and diversifying his capital in new ventures, that he hadn't paid due attention to the personal dramas of a simple employee. At 3 o'clock, punctually, the screams started again. This time, Derek didn't turn away from the window. He watched with growing horror as, through the kitchen window of the old house, he saw a female silhouette moving aggressively. He picked up his cell phone again and began to record, this time with more determination. What he saw through the cell phone screen made him nauseous. Carol was holding something in her hands. It seemed to be a kitchen utensil, and gesturing violently towards a small figure that he could barely distinguish. Lily's screams echoed through the afternoon, filled with a pain that made Derek's blood run cold in his veins. When the silence returned, he remained at the window for a few more minutes, his heart pounding in his chest. His fortune, his millionaire profits, all the dividends he received monthly from his investments, none of that mattered in the face of the powerlessness he felt at that moment. He had just witnessed something that would change everything. The question now was, what would he do with this information? That night, Lily slept on the floor of the backyard where Carol had left her as punishment for making too much noise during the afternoon. The girl curled up in her own t-shirt and looked at the stars through the branches of the magnolia tree. In her 4-year-old mind, she made a silent request to her mother, wherever she was, that someone, anyone, would take her away from that place of pain. Across the street, Derek couldn't sleep, tormented by the certainty that he needed to act, but paralyzed by the same emotional inertia that had consumed him since he built invisible walls around his heart. For the first time in 5 years, his financial assets seemed insignificant in the face of the moral responsibility that presented itself at his door. 3 days had passed since Derek discovered the child's identity, and guilt consumed him like a slow fire. During those days, he had systematically documented the episodes of violence, always at 3 o'clock, always with the same methodical brutality. His collection of videos and audios grew, but his courage to act remained paralyzed. On that Thursday morning, Martha made a decision that would change the course of everything. She had spent the night awake, tormented by the certainty that a child was suffering just a few feet from her house. Her 4 decades as an educator had taught her to recognize the signs, and they were all present in the Carters' old house. At 7 o'clock in the morning, she positioned herself in the side yard of her house, the place from where she had the best view of the backyard of the old house. What she saw horrified her. Lily was sitting under the magnolia tree, completely alone, wearing only a torn t-shirt and underwear. Her small arms were marked by obvious burns, some still red and inflamed. The girl was drawing on the ground with a piece of charcoal, creating shapes that Martha recognized as birds. It was a heartbreaking scene, a 4-year-old child trying to find beauty in the midst of suffering, drawing symbols of freedom in the dirty ground of her captivity. "My God," the teacher whispered, her hands trembling as she held the fence that separated the yards. It was worse than she imagined, much worse. Lily looked up and saw the woman watching her. For a moment, the two stared at each other in silence. Then, to Martha's surprise, the girl smiled, a weak but genuine smile, and waved shyly. "Hi, Grandma," Lily said with her tiny voice, using the affectionate way she addressed all elderly ladies. "Hi, honey," Martha replied, struggling to keep her voice steady. "Are you okay?" Lily glanced quickly at the windows of the house before answering. "Yes, I am. I'm just drawing birdies." "That's beautiful. Do you like two birds?" "I really like them. They can fly wherever they want," the girl replied, her big eyes shining with a sadness that broke Martha's heart. At that moment, Carol's harsh voice echoed from inside the house. "Lily, where are you, girl?" The terror that instantly took over the child's face said everything Martha needed to know. Lily got up quickly, wiped her hands on her t-shirt, and ran inside the house, but not before looking one more time at Martha with an expression that screamed for help. Across the street, Derek had witnessed the entire interaction. Through his window, he could partially see the Carters' backyard, and the sight of the marks on Lily's arms made him sick. For the first time in 5 years, he felt genuine fury burning in his chest. His investments in gold and his treasury bonds had never seemed so irrelevant. All his accumulated wealth, all the compound interest that had made him a multi-millionaire, what good were they if he couldn't protect a defenseless child who lived just a few feet away? At 11 in the morning, Martha made a courageous decision. She put on her best Sunday dress, grabbed a tray of homemade cookies that she had prepared as a pretext, and headed back to the old house. This time, she wouldn't take no for an answer. Carol answered the door reluctantly, clearly annoyed by the neighbor's insistence. "Mrs. Stevenson, I already told you it's not a good time." "Carol, honey, I brought some cookies I made yesterday," Martha interrupted firmly. "And I insist on getting to know little Lily better. As long-time neighbors, it's our duty to support each other." Before Carol could protest, Martha had already entered the house, using all the authority that decades in the classroom had given her. The interior of the old house was dark and smelled of mildew mixed with alcohol. Old and poorly maintained furniture occupied the living room, and there was a heavy atmosphere that made the air seem hard to breathe. "Lily is sleeping," Carol lied, blocking the path to the back of the house. "What a shame." "Maybe another time then," Martha said, but her experienced eyes had already catalogued several disturbing details. Dark stains on the kitchen floor that seemed to have been poorly cleaned, a metal spoon left on the stove, and, most notably, small charcoal drawings on the walls that had clearly been made by a child. At that moment, a soft sound came from the direction of the kitchen, a muffled sob, almost imperceptible. Martha and Carol froze. The silence that followed was tense and revealing. "Must be the neighbor's cat," Carol said quickly, but her voice trembled slightly. Martha smiled and nodded, but she had decided that she had already seen enough. "Well, I'll let you rest then. But Carol, remember that I'm always right next door if you need anything at all." Martha's tone made it clear that it wasn't just a casual offer of help. It was a subtle but direct warning. After the teacher left, Carol slammed the door shut and went to the kitchen, where she found Lily huddled behind the gas stove, trying to hide. The girl had cried when she heard Martha's gentle voice, remembering the kindness she had once known. "You were making noise," Carol accused, her eyes already shining with familiar fury. "No, Aunt Carol, I didn't make noise," Lily protested, but her small voice sounded weak even to her. Carol grabbed the metal spoon that was on the stove and placed it directly in the flame. Lily recognized the ritual and began to tremble. She knew what was coming next. "You want to attract attention, don't you?" Carol hissed as the spoon heated up. "Want the neighbors to come here and ask questions?" Across the street, Derek had positioned his cell phone at the window and was recording again. This time, he managed to capture not only the sounds, but also partial images through the kitchen window. What he saw made him make a decision that would change everything. He could no longer be just a silent observer. Joan had been a good person, a dedicated employee who always spoke of her daughter with love. That child was his responsibility now, whether he wanted to be or not. While Lily suffered another episode of systematic torture, Derek made a call that he hadn't made in months. He called Dr. Robert Caldwell, his personal lawyer and old college friend. "Robert, I need your help with a delicate situation," he said, watching through the window as Lily's screams echoed through the afternoon. "It's about a child, and I think it may be a matter of life and death." Robert, motivated by loyalty to his friend and his sense of justice, agreed to come immediately. He had known Derek for 3 decades and knew that he wouldn't make such a request for frivolous reasons. That night, after Carol fell asleep drunk on the living room sofa, Lily managed to quietly slip out into the backyard. Her new burns were stinging, but the physical pain was less than the pain in her heart. She sat under the magnolia tree and looked at the stars, humming her mother's song softly. What she didn't know was that for the first time in months, people were truly paying attention to her suffering. Martha, in her house, had already decided that she would file a formal report the next day. Derek was awaiting Robert's arrival, finally ready to transform his paralysis into action. And in the coming days, Lily's life would change in ways she couldn't even imagine, but not before facing the darkest moments of her short existence. Dr. Robert Caldwell arrived at Derek's condo on Friday morning with a grave expression on his face. The 2 men had been classmates in college almost 3 decades ago, and Robert knew well the emotional isolation that his friend had built after the loss of his wife. Therefore, the urgent phone call the night before had surprised him so much. "Derek, I need you to tell me exactly what's going on," Robert said, sitting down in the spacious living room of the condo. "You talked about a child in danger, but I need details." Derek poured coffee and positioned himself near the window, the place that had become his obsession in recent days. "The girl who lives in the house across the street is the daughter of a former employee of mine, Joan Carter. She's being mistreated by the aunt who cares for her." "Mistreated how?" Robert asked, taking a notepad from his briefcase. "Burns, daily screams, neglect." Derek paused, struggling with the words. "I have recordings, Robert, evidence of what's happening." Robert watched the videos in growing silence, his face paling with each scene. As a lawyer specializing in family law, he had seen many difficult cases, but something about the systematization of that violence deeply disturbed him. "Derek, we can't wait any longer. I need you to give me all these recordings today. I'm going to contact Child Protective Services and the district attorney. This child needs to be removed from that house immediately." While the 2 men planned the intervention, across the street, Lily was living another day of terror. Carol had woken up with a particularly severe hangover and discovered that there was no more alcohol in the house. Her irritation multiplied when she found new drawings of birds that Lily had made on the kitchen wall during the early morning. "How many times do I have to tell you not to mess up the walls?" Carol screamed, grabbing Lily by the arm hard enough to leave marks. "You're a pest, a curse on this house." Lily tried to explain, to say that she had dreamed of her mother and that the drawings made her feel less alone, but the words were lost in sobs. At 4 years old, she still didn't fully understand why her aunt hated her so much. Martha, who had spent the whole night thinking about the conversation with Lily in the backyard, was on her way to downtown Charleston when she heard the screams coming from the old house. Her heart tightened, but this time she knew exactly what to do. Instead of hesitating, Martha went directly to the small office of Child Protective Services. She knew the counselor, Annabelle Davis, well, a former student of hers who had dedicated herself to the protection of vulnerable children. "Annabelle, I need to talk to you about a very serious situation," Martha said, entering the office with determination. "A child in danger, my neighbor. I'm sure she's being mistreated." Annabelle straightened in her chair, her expression immediately becoming serious. During her 5 years as a counselor, she had learned to recognize when a report was serious. And Martha Stevenson wasn't the type of person who would make frivolous accusations. While Martha was reporting her observations across town, Robert was in a similar meeting in the district attorney's office. District Attorney Luke Gallagher listened attentively while Robert presented the evidence collected by Derek. "This is compelling evidence," the DA said, examining the videos on Robert's cell phone. "I'm going to order an immediate investigation and request the removal of the child from the family environment." Thus, by a coincidence that would change Lily's destiny, 2 simultaneous complaints reached Child Protective Services on the same morning. Annabelle Davis was finishing writing down Martha's account when her phone rang. "Annabelle, this is DA Luke Gallagher. I need you to make an urgent intervention at a house on Brick Street. We have evidence of severe child abuse. Is that number 127, Yellow Colonial House?" Annabelle asked, looking at Martha in surprise. "Exactly. How did you know?" "I just received a complaint about the same house. 2 independent sources. This confirms the seriousness of the situation. At 2 in the afternoon, a coordinated operation was being set up. Annabelle Davis, accompanied by 2 social workers and a court officer, was heading to Brick Street. Martha had offered to accompany the team, using her experience with traumatized children. Derek watched everything from his window, his heart pounding in his chest. Finally, after days of paralysis, he had managed to act. Robert was by his side, both witnessing the moment that would change Lily's life forever. "You did the right thing," Robert said, placing his hand on his friend's shoulder. "I hope it's not too late," Derek replied, his billionaire investments seeming insignificant in the face of that child's life. In the Carter's house, Carol had gone out to buy alcohol at O'Malley's bar, leaving Lily locked in the stuffy room. The girl kept singing softly, unaware that her life was about to change radically. When Annabelle Davis knocked on the door of the old house and received no answer, she used her legal authority to enter the property. What they found inside exceeded even their worst expectations. A dirty and poorly maintained house, a strong smell of alcohol, and obvious signs of neglect in every room. It was Martha who first heard the weak voice coming from the room in the back. "There's someone here," she said, guiding the team down the hallway. When they opened the door to the room and found Lily huddled in the corner, singing her sad song, everyone present felt a pang in their hearts. The girl raised her big, frightened eyes, not understanding who these people were. "Hi, honey," Annabelle said, crouching down to be at the child's level. "My name is Annabelle. We've come to help you." Lily looked at Martha, recognizing the gentle lady who had talked to her in the backyard. A glimmer of hope shone in her eyes, but it was quickly replaced by fear. "Aunt Carol will be mad," she whispered. "You don't have to worry about that now," Martha said, reaching out to the girl. "We're going to get out of here, okay?" Lily's departure from the old house was a moment that would be etched in the memory of everyone present. The girl held Martha's hand tightly, her steps small and hesitant as she crossed the door that had been her prison for so many months. Across the street, Derek watched the scene with tears in his eyes. For the first time since Mary Ann's death, he felt that he had done something truly meaningful. His fortune, his financial assets, all his accumulated capital, all of this had gained a new purpose. In the days that followed, while Lily received medical and psychological care in a temporary foster home, Derek made a decision that surprised everyone. He created a special fund, allocating a significant portion of his profits and dividends to cases of children at risk in the region. But the biggest surprise came when Martha, who had become Lily's temporary caregiver during the legal process, discovered that the girl possessed exceptional intelligence. Despite the trauma, Lily demonstrated a surprising learning ability and an extraordinary artistic talent. 3 months later, when Carol was permanently removed from custody, Derek made an unexpected request. He wanted to adopt Lily. Not out of pity, but because he had discovered in that courageous child the daughter he never had and the purpose his life needed. At the adoption hearing, Lily held Derek's hand confidently. She had learned that not all adults hurt, that there were good people willing to protect her. And when the judge asked if she wanted Derek to be her father, she replied with a radiant smile, "Yes, I do. He saved me from my nightmares." Derek, the man who had accumulated immense wealth but lived in emotional solitude, finally discovered that the true wealth of life was not measured in dollars or bitcoins, but in the genuine love of a child who chose him as her father. And Lily, who had gone through so much suffering, found not only safety but a family that would love her unconditionally. Martha, who had become Lily's adoptive grandmother, smiled as she saw the two walking together through the streets of Charleston, the girl finally free to draw her birds on paper, no longer on the walls as an escape from pain, but as an expression of her renewed joy. If you like this wonderful story, please comment. Your opinion is very important. And if you love beautiful stories, subscribe to my channel. I promise to make your day better with my videos.